Welcome to the Supply Chain Beyond the Hype podcast with me, Chris Clowes, and a variety of guests from across the supply chain world, ready to share their insights, stories, and experience to help you go beyond the hype. Hello everyone, and welcome to this month's Supply Chain Beyond the Hype podcast, where we are going to delve into the perhaps murky world of data and the impact that it can have on the supply chain. I'm really pleased that I'm joined by two great guests, Richard Ashton, co-founder and CEO of Arma, and Steve Haywood, a demand planning specialist, supply chain guru from Prince's and No7 Beauty Company, which is part of Walgreens Boots Alliance. As we look at the power of data, if you read some articles today in the press, you would think that we are data-driven supply chains. Everybody knows everything that's happening, and AI is about to take over the world. But actually, in reality, is it a little bit different to that? And we still have Bob's spreadsheet supporting the whole IT infrastructure of billion-dollar businesses. Before we delve into that detail and explore the topic, it'd be great if Richard, you can give an introduction to you, how you got into data, and what your business is doing now.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Steve, hi Chris. So Richard from Arma, we have been going since 2008, so kind of fell into it by accident, strangely. Was working in a contact centre as a manager and wonder where all these sheets of paper kept coming with all these numbers on. So I, cut a long story short, started compiling statistics and metrics for the teams, various elements of the organisation, and then went consulting in 2008. Worked across a number of different industries: retail, manufacturing, real estate, universities, performing rights. Every business has got data, so we help them work through that in a manageable way. So whatever technology works, meeting the clients where they are in their needs, and just trying to dispel the myth that data is scary.
Awesome. Sounds a little bit like most people's entry into supply chain as a career. I don't think anyone picks it. They always just fall into it. And I fell into it when I was ordering crisps for Morrison's after they'd just bought out a Safeway store. And Morrison's decided not to use the data that was available from Safeway systems. So we can perhaps cover that on in a bit, cover that later on.
Yeah, definitely.
Steve, how did you get into supply chain?
Well, I've got sort of 30 years of demand planning experience. I've had sort of 22 years in food manufacturing with companies that started off as HL Foods and Premier Foods and was eventually bought by Prince's. And I've been demand planning everything from cans of baked beans through to sort of cans of tuna and olive oils and all sorts of things within the Prince's environment. And then I've had 8 years in the beauty industry, working for No7 Beauty Company, who's a CPG or arm, if you like, of the Walgreens Boots Alliance, and linked with obviously with Boots as a retailer, but also supplying other third-party customers as well throughout the world. But yeah, my involvement in supply chain really started with information and almost just taking big green and white sort of printouts from computers and trying to turn them into data that people could actually understand and actually use, and providing management information from all of this data. And then they said, well, can you do something with this forecast stuff that you think people should be using and should be doing and things? And I got into it that way, sort of thing. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate that introduction from both of you. And it'll be great to sort of dive right into the meat of it. And Richard, from your experience, why do so many businesses still find data intimidating?
I think in my experience, it's because data has a massive PR problem. And I mean that from a self-PR problem perspective. So if you Google data analytics or data platform, you get a plethora of tech solutions and platforms. You get data breaches, bad news. So if you're not comfortable in that or have experience in that environment, then it'd be very daunting, and it just seems way too complicated. And there's always been this perception that it is not, maybe for us as an organization, there might be pockets like we've alluded to already where there's a sudden demand of something and we need some information. But without actually sitting down and looking at it as a bigger picture, it always seems to get kind of pushed down the road a little bit. And because it's like, oh, it's not to me. I always say there's two reactions when you say data to people. There's either just complete nonplussed, not interested, it's not for me, I'm happy with my spreadsheet version 324, or it's just absolute fear, because there's the 2%, that is the two worlds that you've got by way of PR, and that's, I think, where that problem starts to come in, personally.
Yeah, really. I find it a fascinating challenge that the work that we do with big businesses, that billion turnover businesses, we might look at a network design for someone and say, we need your outbound data, inbound data for a year, and your SKU master file. And if we're looking at multiple geographies with multiple ERP systems, multiple logistics providers, it's nigh on impossible to get. And it's remarkable that some businesses won't know their cost to serve for a given customer in a given region, because everyone has just allocated the total cost of logistics as a percentage of the revenue. So it's we find it remarkable how little businesses can understand their data.
I think as well, there's always been a heavy reliance on financial metrics, quite rightly. Effectively, a business is measured on successes, whether you've made a profit, etc. So that is that is like the top percent of the information that you have in an organization. Are you measuring anything underneath that? Are you capturing information? Are you reporting on what influences that headline number? And that's is a mindset that I think has never really been shaken in organizations that aren't really data driven. And data driven itself as a phrase is cliched, dare I say, but it's been able to go, what drives that number, and ask questions. And quite often it's always been, oh, costs are up, down, profits up, down, great, that's it, move on. Whereas there's a whole missed opportunity underneath. And as you say, the challenges that a big organization will have with regards to data are pretty similar to what a smaller organization will have with regards to data silos, lack of data confidence, unable to lay their hands on the information like you alluded to quickly, and it just drifts and carries on and carries on. And you just need to kind of pause, get a grip, and then kind of move forward. But the economies of scale are different. The technology now is a barrier to entry is near zero by way of infrastructure and technology costs. What's the objection now? Why is that now not becoming available or being used by companies of every single size?
Yeah. And Steve, you say yourself, 30 years in the industry across a number of different businesses, products and sectors. How have you seen the way that data is used change over that time? Or is forecast accuracy any better now than it was 30 years ago?
I would like to think so. I would like to think that there's those improvements. I think there's still a vast array of approaches to demand planning. I think there are some people that will have these really sophisticated demand planning systems, but I think there are still people that are still using spreadsheets. They're still doing everything in a very manual way. And it's the same with data. I think some companies will have a vast array of data, and some will be sort of struggling to find lots of different sources. But whenever I talk about demand planning and data and everything, I'll always use this analogy, which is usually about a milking stool. and the number of legs on a milking stool. But I think for today's conversation, I think I'm going to change that slightly. I'm going to talk about it as wheels on a bike. And the thing is, when you're looking at data, your very primitive demand planning approaches might only have a single source of data. And you're going to be trying to ride a unicycle, and you're going to be wobbling all over the place because you've only got your actual shipments, let's say, as your past history of what you're doing demand planning on. And each bit of information, each extra data source that you can bring into the process is like adding another wheel to the bike. So you might have your future promotion plans. That's another wheel to your bike. So suddenly you're now riding a two-wheel bike, where you're going to be a little bit more stable then. Then you can bring in your future MPD and your new listings and everything else. So you're now on a tricycle. You're getting a little bit of stability. And sometimes that might be as much as people have got. And it's okay. It's fine. You're stable, but you go around the corner too quickly, you're going to fall off. You've got to, you find it difficult to sort of really advance on that. But then if you start adding in more data, you add more wheels to this bike, and suddenly you're getting a 4, 5, 6 wheel bike, and you sort of, it's impossible to fall off, and you're getting great stability and everything else. And that will be data like EPOS. And do you bring EPOS into it, or do you bring in your customers' stock levels? Do you bring in seasonality sort of profiles and things? And even when you're starting getting into the S&OP world, you start bringing in commercial forecasts and financial forecasts and things like that. And you bring in all these extra things. The only thing is, to keep the bike analogy going, when you've got the bike and you've got all these wheels, you suddenly start getting a really heavy thing to pedal and to bring down the line. And that's where you need to almost make sure that you're using this data efficiently, because otherwise, as soon as you start getting a little bit of an uphill, you're going to be pedaling really hard, trying to bring this bike all the way, keep it moving. But that's where data can sometimes seem like it can drag you down, unless you've got a good approach to how you use the data.
And where do you stand, if that's the right way to phrase the question? So in a very simplistic way, when looking at forecasting, there's two types of data. There's what happened, and there's what you think is going to happen.
Yeah.
And an awful lot of weight is often placed on what you think is going to happen. And I can't remember which fighter it was or boxer which said this, but a plan is really good until you get punched in the face.
Mike Tyson.
Was it Mike Tyson? Thank you, Richard. So how do you put in place processes and systems from a demand planning or forecasting perspective that can deal, especially post-COVID, where everything has become so much more erratic, major macro crises are affecting consumer confidence, there's massive peaks and massive troughs. So I think first to you, Steve, how do you deal with forecasting when forecasting, as soon as you've written it down, is inaccurate? And then Richard, it'd be great to hear from you some of your experience of dealing with that and dealing with forward-looking statements and how you can integrate that into your data approach. So maybe you first, Steve.
Yeah, I think in doing demand planning, you're always on this impossible job. You're trying to predict the unpredictable, if you like, in terms of that. But it's about the speed of the reaction. If you can course correct, or if you can sort of see what's happening quicker by looking at extra data, then you can actually you can almost take some sort of some sort of correcting action to your numbers and correcting action to the business as to what they're sourcing in, and making sure it's the right things. Obviously, the pandemic was an example of something that was very immediate and very sudden. And in No7 Beauty Company, we certainly noticed a change in what people were buying almost instantly. People were not buying lipsticks and foundations and everything because they were wearing a mask. And so there was no need for that. But they were still buying their skincare because they still wanted to keep up their sort of skincare regime. But then they also started buying an awful lot more of an indulgent bathing type product because they were pampering themselves because they were inside. They were sort of stuck at home, and so they would be buying things that they could sort of treat themselves, but within the house, sort of thing. But also another example would be MPD. This isn't pandemic related, it's just general MPD. But whenever you launch MPD, you're always going to have an impact on other products, because if someone sees something that's new, they're going to go, oh, I'll buy that. But it's what they're not buying that you've got to be conscious of. And some of this, without having all the data sources available, some of it is going to take a while to come out of the woodwork. And it's by having that extra data that you can actually see things, and it's the speed of the reaction. You can't predict it necessarily. You can have a good guess. You can make assumptions. You can say, we're launching this product, we think it's going to have a 20% impact on this other range because people are going to switch. But it will never be 20%. It will always be something different. But you can build that into your launch strategy, if you like, and your impact and everything, your cannibalization. But it's always about having the data to have that speed of reaction to make sure that you're on top of it as soon as you can see what's happening.
Richard?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's something we've done quite a bit of in different industries, but being able to get hold of information as near to real time as possible. I appreciate you can't, from a demand planning or supply chain, react almost instantaneously to what you're seeing by way of real numbers. However, by having that availability of information and in a way overlaying with historical, present and future, and I think one of the things that was maybe is overlooked often is present, because some of the work we've done before was creating a kind of stock planning perspective, and what it was overlaying the last few weeks of sales data with stock levels, with what that prediction looks like moving forward. So quite a simplistic demand planning, but it was updated twice a day. So you could see by way of a particular site manager, when reordering, they could see, well, what I've got left, what I'm looking at now, and what that looks like by way of reorder. Every time they opened it, it was updated. So yes, you're not going to adjust it, phoning up the supplier every few hours saying they need to change it, but you have that picture. And so it's the combination of history and future, but also present, because that adds a slight adjustment to maybe what the future might look like in a real kind of concentrated section. So rather than 12 months, you're looking at, as you touched on, Steve, seasonality. There's also another thing I wrote down there about segmentation. So being able to bucket things up a little bit to be able to forecast and look at it and go, well, this profile of this new product, for example, fits this typical profile that we launched in this time of year 2 years ago. This is what we saw. That narrows down that forecast a little bit by way of being able to quite easily, in a way of a product structure, roll that up and actually see and apply a bit more logic and weighting to that forecast.
Yeah, what impact do humans have, and either their positivity or naivety? I think one of the biggest surprises that I saw in the world of supply chain post-COVID, and so we had a consumer boom in around 2022, maybe 21, and then there was no warehouse space anywhere in 22, 23 because everyone had over-ordered. They thought that what I sold in 21, when people started going out again, was going to sell again. So garden furniture, summer clothing and loungewear, patio burners, home DIY stores, they all thought that what happened in 22 was going to happen again in 23, which is a plus 10% because I have to give a forecast that's going to improve, which is, yes, hindsight might be easy, but that's utter madness. Surely those businesses could see, and people, that this was a one-off. This was a reaction because we've got loads of money in the bank because we've not been on holiday and consumers weren't allowed to spend anything. So what role does human gullibility, naivety, optimism play in forecasting and managing data, Richard? And then what experience have you had from that, Steve, kind of in the real world?
So, the question is there a tendency to change the information that you're seeing to fit the scenario that you want? Now, what's the phrase? Statistics, damn statistics and lies, isn't there? It's like, okay, but there has to be, let's wind this back a step. So any system or dashboard or report is only ever as good as the people using it. So there has to be an element of education and confidence by way of how that data is perceived and how it is viewed and what it means and the context around it. So I don't think gullibility comes into it. I think maybe lack of confidence to actually question and push back and go, is that right? Are we realistically? So to use your example, somebody in that room probably went, really? And but being able to come back and go, actually, that is maybe not realistic, and this is why. And being able to back that up with data and information to make that decision a data-backed decision. So if they went back pre-COVID and go, this is typically our trend, there was a massive drop and then a massive spike. So logically, we'll expect that to maybe recalibrate, add a bit of bump on because we want to hit a better target. That's probably more of a realistic outcome. Do anyone really want to stay there and have that conversation or look at or interrogate and question the information and the forecast and everything with enough confidence to actually go, I don't think that's really realistic, and be able to question? And I think one of the biggest overlooked pieces in any data project or conversation is the person, is the people, and being able to go, you need to have that confidence to go, I don't believe that number is accurate, or I actually am going to challenge that. And that also comes back into culture as well within a company. To be data-driven culture is, okay, it's a cliche, but being able to, for a whole organization to be in the position to go, I'm going to challenge that because I know I'm going to get heard, and I know that's wrong because of the information I have available to me, and I can then present forward. It's that feedback loop to be able to engage the wider business, not just a prescribed metric or prescribed forecast or a prescribed platform, that's the team members that are doing the operational day-to-day activities who have probably the best insight as to what needs to be measured, what the trends are, what are people is going on, have that ability to feed back into the loop.
It's amazing how often any business problem normally comes down to people and how engaged and how empowered people are, whether it's data, supply chain, commercial, marketing, and 9 times out of 10 comes back to people. And Steve, what was your experience then in that kind of post-COVID peak and then drop, or the bullwhip effect, I guess?
Yeah, I think just backing up what Richard was saying, in terms of it's about sort of when you're looking at data, it's about interpreting that data back into the real world and actually seeing it and almost lifting the numbers off the page as just being numbers, but actually then sort of realizing what those numbers are saying. It's all well and good. And then this is where particularly I think the role of a demand planner as an independent arbiter of the figures, if you like. We're not there to try and hit budgets and hit targets and everything else. We're trying to get a realistic view of what we think is going to happen. And you'll have sometimes when a commercial team might say, well, we're going to launch this new product and we think it's going to do this. And you go, but hang on, that's going to take 20% of the market, for example. How is this product going to take that percentage share of the market, sort of thing? In your example with your patio heaters and things, people can say, well, yeah, but they've bought a patio heater before. That patio heater is not going to break. That's still going to be there next year. That they can bring that back out of the shed and use that the following year. They're not having to buy new every single year, sort of thing. And I think it's the interpretation of that. And there's certainly been times in the past where, as a demand planner, you've got to take that sort of that arbitrary view, and you've got to try and help the teams you're talking to, just to help them understand what their data actually means in the real world. And it's that connection to the products, that connection to the numbers and things, because I think sometimes people can get too much into the data and not realize what it means outside to the outside world, if you like, or they're looking at the outside world and not realizing what it means to the data. And it's a combination of those.
And what do you think went wrong then in 22-23? Because similar businesses in a given sector made the same mistake. Businesses across many sectors made the same mistake. Was everyone afraid of missing out on sales? Because arguably they hadn't been able to keep up with the peak in 2020-21 because the demand was higher than what was in the country, and then the supply chain couldn't keep up. So were people afraid of missing out again? Were they too optimistic and just happy? Were they why do you think so many people made the same mistake? Because in warehouse occupancy rates got to the highest rate they've ever been. There was less than 1% of warehouses available, partly driven by excess PPE. Storage rates hit £3 per pallet per week, just €10 per pallet per month in Europe, and just such massive historical highs. Why did so many people feel unempowered to challenge what were clearly ridiculous forecasts?
It might be a difficult one to sort of say exactly, but I think the issue was that we'd gone through such a turmoil, such an upheaval of the whole market. People had probably lost track of where they thought things were going to go on. Pandemics sort of and lockdowns and everything else, people had never heard of them in 2019. What was a lockdown? We've never had a lockdown type of thing. And then suddenly by this time we've gone through this, we've had such a change in the market that I think people had lost track of where they thought this could go. And whether it was optimism if they were on the upside of it, whether it was if they were on the downside of it. So if you were in a business trying to sell lipsticks and foundations and things, where was it all going to go wrong? How far would it bottom out, if you like, if people were not buying them? If you're in a category that's really gaining, how much more will this go? And I think it was the uncertainty, I think, that probably made it very difficult. But yeah, it needed a bit of a leveling effect, and obviously sort of some people would have been burnt either way, I think, on what happened.
Yeah,
I think as well, and in certain circumstances, even you have data silos within an organisation. So this is going back a step, maybe, but those data silos will lead to decision silos. So what you've got is independent departments or pieces of the chain making decisions without necessarily communicating with the other elements of the organisation. So if product development or somebody was creating these new products without really thinking about every other element of that process in a way that is kind of, open sharing data and open sharing information, you've maybe got this skewed view of maybe what is reality, what can we expect, and the impact of, as you say, COVID. No one could have predicted what happened. No one could have really knew how you're going to come out of that. But there would have been clues. There would have been instances or recalibration points that could have been applied potentially. But a lot of it can be kept in silos, which is why the joined up approach is far, far better.
And that joined up approach is, especially in larger organizations, is so difficult, where individual people or teams or business units want to either keep a little bit back because they don't want to give everything away, or they've put a little bit too much optimism in. So by the time you get to the aggregate result, there's optimism on optimism on optimism on optimism, and you're just way out, and you've got absolutely no chance of ever getting there. And so changing tack very slightly and building on that, Richard, you mentioned earlier on in the conversation about the right information that is useful for an organization beyond profit and loss. What are the key KPIs? What are the key performance indicators that businesses should be using? And what data do they need to do that to maximize the chances of success?
It's a multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? I think
the first one,
every company's sorry.
The first one is surely hire you, and you'll come in and sort it
out.
Well,
yeah, of course, yes. Damn, I missed that sales opportunity. But it is different for every organisation, and I always say this: yes, you might have the similar systems, and you might be in a similar industry, but what you want to see by way of a metric or an outcome is going to be unique to your company and unique to you. So you have to really sit down and work that out.
Isn't it?
The financial metrics are the same, right? So everyone has to abide by the same financial metrics and accounting rules. But it's then you need to sit down and go, well, okay, well, what drives that within our organisation? What drives that number? What drives simplistically? What drives our costs? Okay, now what drives those elements? And you gradually, there's the old word of balanced scorecard as an approach to be able to understand where everything fits in and what metrics to apply at what stage. But it's still very relevant. It's become kind of less trendy in some respects, but it's still incredibly relevant, because then you understand how your operation sits together by way of being able to measure what pullers and levers change. So if we change this, what does that do to everything else? It's also a good way of working out what forecasting works out. But I think to be able to look at something, again, there's also sometimes a tendency to measure too much or too little. So measuring everything just for the sake of it, because I've got a new fancy tool, so I want to measure everything. Stop. You need to be able to create the view where the key decision makers within an organization, whether they're in procurement, finance, operation, can see the information they need to see and make a decision with context. They don't need to know everything else, but it's building that view around what your overall targets are, and then how that translates down through your organization by way of what levers and what drivers do you sit underneath that headline number.
Yeah. And Steve, how have you seen KPIs change from a demand planning perspective over the years, and has anything become more or less important in that time?
I think from a demand planning point of view, the key KPI is always going to be your forecast accuracy. And I don't think you can get away from that. You're generating a forecast, and how accurate was that forecast? I think the only thing that you can improve on, if you like, in terms of a KPI, of a forecast accuracy KPI, is being able to see it longer term, to see that your forecast is more stable. If you are forecasting, and I've worked in different businesses with different lags, but let's just, for example, talk about a 1 month lag. So if you're talking about a forecast with a 1 month lag, if you had a forecast that was really high, 50,000 units, then the next month it was still 50, and then 50, and then 50. And then right at the last minute, when your KPI was taken, you suddenly reduce your forecast to 20,000 units, and you sell 20,000 units. You're patting yourself on the back saying, didn't we do well? And in the supply chain world, they're saying, but we're sitting on all this stock because we bought against the 50,000 you originally asked for. And they'll say, well, I hit my KPI. And they'll go, yeah, but what about ours, type of thing. And so I think it's about measuring your KPI, but measuring it at different points to try and show that you've got a stability in there. And that like it's exactly the same thing going the other way. You might be really, really low, and at the last minute you put it up, and then suddenly you're having to air freight stock in or put extra deliveries on really quickly or try and turn things around really quickly. And it's not an efficient way of working. If you can show that, yes, I'm hitting a really good accuracy at my 1 month lag, but at my 3 month lag, I'm also showing a really good accuracy. And at a 6 month lag, I'm showing a really good accuracy. And this is where your S&OP process starts sort of coming in. If you've got a good, stable forecast, then you can really sort of show that you've got a demand planning process that's really working well for the business. And I think that's where you then see improvements through the way the whole business is actually operating. It's not knee jerking from one crisis to another. It's actually showing that stable approach. So I think it's still always going to be KPI. It's still always going to be forecast accuracy as your KPI. But I think it's about the level at which you measure it.
And how do you drive that across those silos? So for the purpose of our listeners around the world, Steve and I worked together in quite different roles. So I looked after the supply chain for a 300-store retail organization in Thailand, and Steve was my supplier almost from a manufacturing perspective. I could barely predict what was going to happen tomorrow. Our business was heavily influenced by Chinese tourists. A video that could go viral on Lime or WeChat, and stores would just be wiped out of stock. But then obviously from a manufacturing perspective, you're working on a 12, 18, 24 month lead time with manufacturers or component parts. So how do you, firstly, Steve, how should businesses bring that view together so that you and I are working to the same goal? And then Richard, have you seen that work well across those data silos in an organization to work towards the same goal?
So yeah, I mean, obviously it is more difficult when you've got a very erratic market. It's more difficult when you've got a long lead time in terms of a supply chain from getting product from the UK out to Thailand, because that accentuates things even more. And I think the main thing to look at is how that product is performing over a general basis sort of thing, and keep an overall outlined sort of shape to the number. Yes, things are going to get sort of promoted at the last minute and things, but it's about trying to get the right balance as to what we think is going on a more general basis. And then it goes down to how you set your safety stock levels and how you set set up your supply chain to deal with that scenario. You're never going to improve it. You're never going to, for Thailand, we were never going to hit sort of the accuracy that we would hit for a UK customer sort of thing, because of the length of the lead check, the supply, also the influences within the market. But it's about saying, how can we improve the way that we deal with that particular customer? How do we get the right overall volume? Because I think at the end of the day, yeah, sort of viral videos aside, because you can't necessarily react to some of those, albeit that they can come and go they can go as quick as they came in the first place, sort of thing. But you know roughly what your market should be, what your size of your market. It's understanding it at a different level, and perhaps you measure your accuracy rather than measuring an individual month accuracy. You measure over a slightly wider period of time to say, do we know roughly the shape of and the volume that we're going to be supplying in that market?
Yeah. I'd love to hear from someone that's cracked this. I mean, there was a particular product that we had that was just went up and up and up and up and up, so much so that production was moved to Asia. Just as it got to Asia, it dropped off a cliff for no apparent reason whatsoever. I'm not sure. I've got no idea how you fix it.
Well, it goes back to your point before about people. It's the people effect in there, and that's trying to predict the unpredictable type of thing.
Was it Churchill that said democracy would be great if it weren't for the voters? And Richard, how, putting politics aside quickly, how have you seen businesses do this well, where you got multiple priorities and bring that together to produce an outcome that is good and positive for the business?
Yes. The key, I think, is regular review. I think Steve just touched on it. It's just to make, you almost need to create a working group. I mean, a challenge here is how many businesses actually have a chief data officer, for one, and how does that then correlate to having a seat at the table for somebody who's managing working with data?
That is the first time I've heard that role. Do companies have that role?
Well, some and some don't. But otherwise, what that does, it brings the importance of data to the stakeholders, to the management team, and has a seat at that table. Where it works really well is bringing key people around a table, virtually or metaphorically, but being able to bring a working group together that review the information they're seeing, review their needs and requirements, and then iterating the platform accordingly. So whether that's supply, whether it's forecast, whether it's reporting, whether it's a combination of everything, what happens historically is a project's been rolled out and then stops. But the business world moves and demands move, changes and everything. And then suddenly that platform becomes obsolete because it's not being used, because that hasn't been refreshed and updated. That's a key mistake, because then everything becomes outdated, it becomes manual. People retract back into the silos, start working on their spreadsheets. Whereas if you keep that momentum going with reviews, with engagement, with bringing it comes back to people again, and being able to bring that confidence up that enables those conversations to happen, being able to tweak a few metrics, changing KPI rounds, suddenly that visibility is on point. It's keeping pace with the demands of an industry, of your customers, of a business. Because, as I mentioned earlier, you have clues within a business. It's all there. It's a cliche, success leaves clues. But all this information that in an operation, it's all data points. It's all creating information that is there, readily available. But again, don't just stop when you roll out a dashboard and then go, right, fine, we're done. We're done for 6 months. Because 3 months later, it'll be like, not being used.
Yeah, a former colleague of mine worked for possibly one of the world's biggest food manufacturers, and the CEO made a conscious effort to embark on rolling out Lean Six Sigma. And the CEO was, this is a 10-year plan. I am not going to see any benefit of this in the next 10 years, but we are going to see it through. Do you think an approach like that can stop companies with struggling to adopt data initiatives and seeing them through despite the clear benefits?
Yes, and I think the best approach is to go with a targeted approach at first. Target key questions, target key areas, something that's burning question that you take ages to answer, or burning question that would make a difference to your next decision. Target that. Answer it, find out what information you need, where to find the data, how to measure it, what metric to apply. And then what that does is then any subsequent platform will form organically around your business needs, going back to no two businesses are the same. It will form around your needs, but then keep that world going, keep lean, keep iterating. And then what that does, it keeps that process moving and keeps it moving. I think too often, if you say it's a 12-month project, okay, great, but it's a 12-month investment of time and resource, not a 12-month project. It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
After month one, what do we want to achieve? It's agile methodology, but not just that. Produce output. See what we can target. See what we can open up. It's only the data. I liken it. It's like an itch you can never scratch. Once you start looking at it. You can look at creating your own data that changes the metric entirely, create your own segmentation. Suddenly it's like, oh, can we look at that? Can we look at this? Can we look at that? Don't shut that off. Don't shut down that inquisitive input from team members and stakeholders. Keep that going, because that's what will keep the culture and the data project moving forward.
Yeah, and maybe for both of you, do you think that working with data, whether it's in a business analytical overall perspective or from a supply chain perspective, do you think that's an exciting career for someone? If you're doing your GCSEs and maths right now, or A levels, do you think people are excited by working in supply chain or data analytics? Maybe Steve, start with you.
Whether they are excited, I would say yes, they should be excited, because I think it's a role that can be really key to a business. You can find yourself almost in the center of how the whole business is performing, because the data is what everyone needs to be able to understand the business and understand what it can be driving and everything. And so therefore, as a career, yes, I would say it's very exciting. But you need to have this really open approach, just coming back on and supporting almost what Richard was saying before about looking at things and changing things. I always liken, when you're doing demand planning, to mowing a cricket square or a bowling green or whatever. And you see that, and they will always mow it in lots of different directions. They'll mow that way, and then they'll mow across the way. They'll mow diagonally and everything. And it's not because they're trying to create pretty patterns. It's because they're trying to make sure that they're keeping it nice and trim and getting the weeds. Because if you only look at things in the same direction, if you only mow in the same direction, eventually you stop seeing what's wrong. You stop seeing what's going on, because you're just looking at it
Is that true?
Yeah.
I honestly thought it was just to put patterns into the grass to make it look nice.
No, if you're mowing the grass and sort of thing, you're always doing it because the grass will start to lean over in one way, and so by mowing it in a different way, you actually keep it really trim. But it's the same thing. If you look at your data in a single way all the time, then eventually you won't see what's going on, because you're just looking at it very tunnel vision. And by looking at it from different angles, from approaching things from a different angle, changing your viewpoint, you'll suddenly go, oh, but I can see that now. I can see what's going on, and suddenly you can find that little problem that you couldn't see where it was happening, sort of thing. And it's so, yeah, when working in data is really good. I think people has a perception of being, oh, it's boring, it's just mundane, it's spreadsheets, it's loads of numbers, it's sort of darkened rooms, and I've just got to sit there and churn away type of thing until I find. But actually, it can be quite pivotal for a company.
And do you think listeners might be surprised that actually some planning goes into these podcasts and some preparation? And Richard and I were talking earlier about the lack of attention span that we all have in 2025. Do you think that today's worker, whether young or old and influenced by smartphones, has the capacity or the inclination to be able to interrogate time after time until they get the right answer data?
I think there's a danger that we over focus on shortcuts and quick wins. And with the explosion of AI recently, and I love AI, it's great, I use it. However, it's only ever as good as the information you give it and the questions you ask of it. There's still a need for someone to look at that, somebody to really understand that. For me, there's a danger that people are going to leap from being quite data immature into thinking AI is going to solve all the problems, and they miss that middle bit out. And suddenly they've ended up with a whole world of problems that AI is just telling you that you've got a whole load of problems instead of you seeing it yourself. I think taking the time to look at it, make sure that you have a robust, accurate information flow and analytics flow from your data before you leap into something that you can get an answer within seconds. It is crucial. It's still incredibly important, That's why all these LLMs built up over many, many years. They've got petabytes upon petabytes of data in there. That's not been compiled over 5 minutes that you just asked a question, it's gone away and found it all. That takes preparation. So the same approach should be used when thinking about data. And from a career perspective, it's not going anywhere. It's not going. It is the foundation of performance management. It's the foundation of AI. So data is there. It's a very exciting opportunity. I would say that, but it's always been. It's never going. It underpins everything. Everything you do, email, so even social media, finance systems, receipts, e-banking, all of this stuff is all underpinned by data.
Yeah, and data is the new oil. And I think that Meta's share price last week rose because it looks like they're finally beginning to make strides in how they can use that 3.3 billion daily users of data, which I think that they're finally working out how to monetize that and what AI impact could have on that, which is great for Meta and shareholders, frightening for me as a user. Well, I really appreciate both of your time. I feel like we could almost go on for hours here. So maybe some final thoughts. Steve, from your perspective, what's your one piece of advice that you'd offer to a supply chain professional looking to refine their demand planning strategies? Just one. And it can't be don't work with Chris.
No. I'll say, I'll go back to my analogy. How many wheels have you got on your bike? And have you got enough wheels on your bike? And are your tires pumped up enough? But it's saying, look at the amount of data you've got. Have you got enough data? Have you got a stable enough process in your strategy, in your demand planning strategy? Have you got enough wheels on your bike without going too much? But then are your tires pumped up properly? Are you making the most of that, of the wheels that you've got, rather than just adding more wheels? Are you making the most of that? So I would leave you with that little thought of a don't be riding a bike with flat tires. Pump them up, make sure they're in good order, and that's your strategy.
I thought you couldn't get a bike with more than 2, possibly 3 wheels, but clearly I've been living under a rock.
I'm thinking I have this image of, when people do these charity bike rides and they've created this sort of 6-8 wheeler sort of bike that loads of people are sitting on and they're all pedaling and everything else. It was sort of that's the image I have when I do usually.
I think they've been terrorizing city centres, haven't they? Or something. And Richard, what's your top tip for businesses that are looking to embrace data more effectively, and maybe for businesses that are at the start of that journey?
Don't view it simply as a technical delivery. You have to upskill or bring up the data confidence within your organization. Don't get seduced in a way by platforms. Don't focus solely on delivering a technical platform. You have to make sure that your team skills are on par with that platform, and you create that confidence and mindset within your organization to ask questions, accept feedback, and create that process moving forward. The platform is kind of irrelevant. There's lots of tools out there now, lots of methods, lots of different ways of doing things. It's all about asking questions, creating that feedback and open environment where we will accept data, we accept what it's telling us, and we now work out how best to represent that and present that as an organization.
And are the best data projects iterative, or are they big bang initiatives?
Iterative these days, 100%. It used to be big bang because of the kind of restrictions on platforms and the size of development teams that were needed. Now it's iterative. It is literally look at where you are now, look at what your requirements are, plot the pathway to do that, and what milestones you need to achieve to realize that view. But don't be afraid to change and pivot. That's why a big bang and suddenly everyone goes, oh no, the world shifted now. We need to now remeasure absolutely everything. And you got to undo and redo the whole thing all over again. Keep it iterative, keep it agile, keep it flexible, communicate, ask questions, and make sure your team are on par.
Well, you've done my job of summarising for me, so I think what a great way to finish. So, Richard, Steve, I really appreciate your time and input into today's podcast, looking at how data can be used in supply chains. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please do subscribe. We really enjoy pulling them together, and I hope you enjoy listening to them. So, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Supply Chain Beyond the Hype. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when new episodes are released.